Hi, I'm Dr. Francine MacInnis. I'm a clinical psychologist in Montreal, and I'm here to talk to you today about healthy thinking in the context of the COVID virus. So maybe a good place to start is, what is healthy thinking? And this is a topic that, or a question that's more complex than it might first seem, and it was the subject of more than 20 years of research, including my own doctoral research many years ago, to clarify whether or not healthy thinking, or the thinking patterns of the emotionally well, whether or not that pattern was realistic or optimistic or positively biased. And after many years of research, it has been confirmed that people who are emotionally well actually have pretty positively biased or optimistic perceptions of themselves and of their lives. And so this created quite a stir back at the time when we had first thought that if you're well, then you don't have a lot of psychological defenses, and so your thinking would be more realistic. But with time, have really seen that these positive biases are present unconsciously for most people, more than 80% of people in the general population. So we don't even know it, and we're operating by these positive biases. And that these biases have a strong protective impact for us. So it's associated with less distress, fewer symptoms of depression, better coping with stress, as well as some very significant health impacts, lower risk of important diseases such as cardiovascular and immune function, and even as far as having an impact on lifespan. So it might be surprising, but this is something that's operating on most people and has a lot of beneficial effects. And now, one reaction to this is, how can it be that delusional thinking can be good for us? And this is a nuance that I would bring to it, is that we're not talking about positively skewed or biased to the extent that we start taking poor risks. So example, in the COVID context, we do want people being able to function and believe that mostly things are going to turn out okay for them, because for the most part, that's true. But that's also partly true because we follow the health directives, or we listen to good advice, and we watch reputable news so that we can take good care of ourselves, so that things do turn out okay. So it's only a problem when it gets in the way of us making good use of information that we should be making use of. So that would be the nuance that I would bring. What is far more worthy of our attention in terms of risks are not positively skewed thinking. It's really the negative biases that is doing us the most harm. And the negative, when you think about it as sort of negative thinking biases, the impact around increases in anxiety and depression and isolation, particularly in the current context. And also that being in a state of hypervigilance or isolation has an impact also on the stress response, which in turn can influence immunity, and some of the good self-protective things can be compromised. So it's really the negative thinking that is worth more of our attention. And why does this all have to do with emotional health? The most salient connection that I can make for you is to talk about how emotions, our emotional experience, and the behavioral choices and decisions that we make are outcomes of our thought process. So the events or the situation occurs, and then there's a lot of thinking and interpretation that happens in the middle, and then the emotions and the behavioral choices come at the end of the chain. And if you're curious to know more about that, there's some really great materials and videos out there on the ladder of inference that paint that picture for you around, talks about the ladder of inference having 7 rungs. The very first rung is the only rung that's based in the facts of the situation. And very quickly thereafter, in rungs 2 and 3, we start to bring in filters or negative biases from, not negative biases, but biases from our history that start to be layered on top of the facts to make sense of them. And then the assumptions and stereotypes and internal narrative takes over until we get to further up the ladder. Rung 5 is when emotions start to take root, and then in rungs 6 and 7 we have decisions and revisions of our thinking that then will carry on to our next events. So if you want to have an impact on your emotional experience and the good decisions or maladaptive decisions you're making, you really want to work upstream on the thoughts. So what are examples of some of the negative thinking patterns that we want to watch out for? So what are examples of what we would call thought traps? And you can look these up online. There's great lists of them. There are classic ones, about 8 to 10, even less, because people have personal patterns for their go-to thought traps. But examples would be, for example, overgeneralization, where something happens, perhaps an upsetting or disappointing event, and then we make it into a general case, a more global case of this is an example of something that always happens to me, or this is what always occurs, this leads to that. And so this is where we take one event and we make it into a whole bigger set of events. For example, just when I get to start feeling good again, COVID happens, and this always happens to me. I guess I'm not meant to be happy. So this is one example of a thought trap, which you can understand how that feeds more distress back into the emotional experience and maybe some of the choices for that person. Another example is black and white thinking, where an aspect of a situation or an outcome for that person means the whole thing is wrong or the whole thing is ruined. So because I can't see my friends in person, where I can't touch them, there's no point. It's all ruined. Relationships, I can't even maintain social contact because what's the point? So you can see how, yes, it's not ideal. It's not how I'd like it to be, but that's different from there's no value in having social contact in this different way that we need to right now. And so you can imagine how that could contribute to isolation, because you would just decide to let it go altogether when we really need even the social contact that we can have. Another example would be catastrophizing, where we would take perhaps a true element, for example, that we could contract the virus, and really take it to our worst case scenario. So not only do I fear I'm going to get sick, but I go quickly to, and I'm going to get sick and I can die, I'm going to die from this, and then my kids won't have parents. So we went quickly from the fear of getting sick to the worst catastrophe that we can imagine. When in reality, we know it is absolutely possible that we can contract the virus. From there, we might get some intensity of symptoms, we don't know. But the most likely outcome is that if we contracted the virus, we would experience some degree of discomfort, possibly, maybe even lots, but would get treated, and most likely outcome is we'd get well again. So really kind of you can see how we went from a feared situation to the worst situation we can imagine. And there's lists of these common thought traps that you can look up. So what do we do with these thought traps? So first and foremost, you need to be able to tap into them. So step one is to be able to tap into your thoughts. And that can be in two ways. One can be deliberately taking steps to tap into your thinking, for example, through mindful meditation, where you've kind of held something still so you can hear the thoughts more readily. Or you can apply mindfulness to other activities when you're cooking or walking, to just see what are the thought patterns that pop into your mind spontaneously. Or when events occur and you feel yourself reactive to those because you have an emotional reaction, likely before that emotional reaction was a sequence of thoughts. So if you stop when you start to feel that emotional reaction and come back to the original event that kicked it off, you can trace the links and the thoughts that got you to the emotional reaction that you have, and you can start to see the points of interconnection. So step one is notice the thoughts. Next after that is, can you discern any of the thought traps? So people have classic ways of interpreting things that can lead to more anxiety or more distress of some form or other. So you might download the list of thought traps when you've written down or made note of your thoughts mentally or on paper, and see if you can identify any of the thought traps, which gives you a good clue that you've probably left from the reality of the situation and gone down a potentially unhealthy path. Next after that, once you've identified whether or not there are any thought traps, what do you do with your thoughts? So that's when we get into the stage of can you challenge your thoughts? Can you deconstruct those thoughts in a more factual, grounded, or balanced way? So, and there are standard questions that you can find out there to challenge or deconstruct. For example, what is the evidence that supports this thought that I'm having? Now that I've identified what I'm thinking, what is the evidence that would support this? And what's the evidence that maybe isn't supported factually from what I'm seeing here and when I look into my own thoughts? Or if I shared this thinking pattern or this thought process with somebody else, where might they challenge me? Where might they see that I have gone off the reserve with my thinking here? Or if somebody brought this to me, would I agree with them? So you can start to see, where can I pick up on there might be some bias here? So challenge the thoughts. The next point is to rebalance those thoughts or restructure those thoughts. So if I were to reconstruct the situation or reframe the situation, how might I do so that is more grounded in the facts or more balanced with, yeah, maybe recognizing it's possible that the way I've interpreted is accurate, but what's an alternative way of framing it that might be more helpful or more useful to getting me to a better decision or a next step that's going to actually serve me? So how do I rebalance that thinking? And there's lots of examples online there too about what cognitive restructuring or balanced thinking looks like. And then in there, the next thought I would have is how you can discern from the worry. So there's a thing called constructive worrying, which is, when I worry, can I detect anything underlying that worry that I really do need to think about and problem solve in particular? So you don't want to stay in the worrying. You want to say, is there something real and valid underlying my worries that needs an action? If it's worries about financial or worries about health or your work, is there anything in there that you can define more specifically that you have some control over, that you could actually make a decision or take a step about and take it? So getting into the thoughts enough can help you pull out what are the distortions, what are the thought traps that are unhelpful, and also leave you with what's useful to you so that you can action it. So you don't want to avoid thinking about things. You actually want to approach the thoughts in a constructive way so that you can let the distortions fall away, or you can challenge them and you can act upon what's left. And then the last idea I'd leave with you is to then think about it from a more positive psychology standpoint, is what am I not noticing that would also be helpful? So what would balance thinking between what I find hard or difficult about the situation? What we often say, what's the negative part, but also what's the positive part of this? Can I see both? So it's and thinking instead of but or thinking. So yes, this is difficult, and yes, this is scary for me. I've also noticed that there are great resources. There are really friendly, helpful, generous, ingenious people out there. And so there's also help available. So if this did happen, there are resources, there are people who can help. So to start to blend acknowledgement of what is hard and difficult or scary with also positive things that are happening around us that help to rebalance the hard and the scary with the very positive and real things that are also happening. So I'll leave that with you for now, and also invite you. You will find in the links to this video invitations. There's two things going on. One is a workshop that's going to talk about healthy thinking and how to learn more skills around healthy thinking. And I'll also be doing a live Facebook session in which we can do Q&A, so you can bring your questions to that. So I look forward to hearing and seeing you then. Bye-bye.